Let's stay with the plight of the Palestinian people. Public hearings have started at the International Court of Justice in The Hague to examine Israel's obligations in connection with its activities in the occupied Palestinian territory. Since the 2nd of March, Israel has completely cut off supplies to the 2.3 million residents of Gaza, and food stockpiled during a ceasefire at the start of the year has all but run out. A number of countries, including the US, Russia, South Africa and China, are all set to deliver remarks at this ICJ hearing throughout this week. Watching developments for us is SABC News correspondent William Denselow, who joins us now from Brussels. And William, this is yet another case before the ICJ that is set to really test the legitimacy of international law.
That's absolutely right. This case really focuses on Israel's decision to suspend support for UNRWA, the United Nations agency that provides aid for roughly 2 million people, Palestinian people in the enclave of Gaza, providing things like food, schooling and medical supplies. We have heard some incredibly strong testimony from Palestinian representatives speaking at the top UN court in The Hague, describing civilians in the Palestinian enclave as being subject to an endless death loop, also showing pictures of babies that had been amputated, saying they didn't have as much as a painkiller because of this halt and because of Israel's moves to block aid entering the Palestinian enclave. We've also heard testimony from United Nations officials themselves, essentially saying that Israel isn't upholding its obligations under the UN Charter. We aren't expecting to hear from Israel this week in person, but they have provided a written testimony, essentially saying that UNRWA has been biased and adding that they have it is their right as part of Israel's sovereign territory to control what aid groups operate within their borders in Israel. So we've also have a strong rebuttal from Israel too.
Yeah, we've, in fact, speaking about that, have heard from the Israeli foreign minister, who's essentially slammed this hearing as a systemic prosecution and delegitimization of his country, which I suppose is a sign, perhaps, of how the country is likely to respond to whatever opinion the ICJ gives at the end of these hearings.
That's absolutely right. Of course, Israeli officials have long accused the United Nations of bias, saying that UNRWA had been infiltrated by Hamas. Now, we have had a response to those accusations by the United Nations representative in The Hague, saying that this is a matter not for Israel to decide upon, but for other parts of the United Nations to look into. And they say that investigations have already very much been underway for a number of months, including the fact that the United Nations immediately terminated work with 10 individuals from UNRWA. So a strong response we're hearing to that argument by United Nations representatives that this is an internal matter of the UN, and regardless of these complaints put forward by Israel, that does not essentially give them the right to totally block access to UN programming, including that decision by Israel on March 2nd to block all humanitarian aid from entering Gaza.
There's always been questions around the extent to which Israel is becoming increasingly isolated due to this ongoing war. And I suppose many will look at the involvement of, or let me rephrase that, they'll look at the number of countries that are involved. 45 states and international organizations said to have written statements as part of these hearings. And these include major powerhouses, including the US, Russia, and China.
That's absolutely right, and we can see clear examples of that isolation in the number of votes we've seen, not just in the United Nations Security Council, but also the United Nations General Assembly. The General Assembly gives a wider view of the global attitude to developments in Gaza since October 7th, 2023, when overwhelmingly and consistently, we've been seeing voting condemning Israel's actions, but significantly, the United States has been one of those holdouts. We've seen blocking actions in the Security Council. Of course, the US having that power of a veto remains a staunch ally of Israel, the staunchest ally, and be very interesting to see when we hear from the United States speaking in The Hague later this week, just exactly what kind of rhetoric we'll be hearing from Washington's representatives. Another country expected to speak more favorably in terms of Israel's actions is Hungary. So a supporting voice here in Europe. Of course, we've already seen Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, decide to invite Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's Prime Minister, to his country, despite that ICC arrest warrant for Israel's leader.
Yeah, sure. Certainly interesting times as we watch, as the world really watches, to see once again the extent to which international law will be adhered to in this case and many others. William Denselow, live to us there from Brussels in Belgium.